There is a type of person you meet who feels safe. They smile easily. They agree with you quickly. They compliment you often. They seem kind. But something inside you feels slightly uneasy, a quiet tension you can't explain. Because sometimes the most dangerous personalities are not aggressive, loud, or openly hostile. Sometimes they are extremely nice. They never argue. They rarely confront. They appear supportive. Yet over time, you begin to feel drained, confused, even guilty. And slowly you start asking yourself a disturbing question: why do I feel worse after spending time with someone who is supposed to be so nice? The answer lies in a hidden psychological pattern. A pattern where kindness is not always kindness, where politeness hides resentment, and where approval becomes a subtle form of control. Because not everyone who appears kind is truly good. Some people wear kindness the way others wear armor, and understanding this hidden psychology can completely change how you see relationships. Fear is a powerful architect of personality. Not the loud, visible kind of fear that makes someone run away from danger, but the quiet psychological fear that whispers inside a person's mind every day. The fear of rejection, the fear of conflict, the fear of being disliked. And strangely, one of the most common masks this fear creates is the mask of extreme niceness. At first glance, it appears harmless, even admirable. A person who always agrees, a person who never argues, a person who constantly helps others and rarely complains. From the outside, this behavior looks like kindness. But psychologically, the story beneath the surface can be very different. Many people who appear excessively nice are not driven by generosity. They are driven by survival. Somewhere in their early life, they learned a dangerous emotional equation. If people approve of me, I am safe. This lesson is rarely taught through words. It is taught through experience. Perhaps they grew up in a home where affection only appeared when they behaved perfectly. Perhaps they were criticized whenever they expressed anger or disagreement. Or maybe they simply discovered that being agreeable made life easier. So slowly, almost unconsciously, they began shaping themselves into the version of a person that others would accept. They learned to smile when they felt hurt. They learned to say yes when they wanted to say no. They learned to suppress their frustration in order to keep the peace. Psychologists often describe this pattern as approval dependency, the deep psychological need to feel valued through the acceptance of others. When approval becomes the foundation of self-worth, a person begins constructing an identity that revolves around pleasing people. It becomes a kind of social armor. If everyone likes you, no one will reject you. If everyone sees you as kind, no one will attack you. But there is a hidden cost to this strategy, because the human psyche was never designed to permanently suppress its own truth. Emotions do not disappear simply because we refuse to express them. They sink beneath the surface, and like pressure building inside a sealed container, they slowly begin to accumulate. Imagine a person who constantly says yes to favors. They help coworkers finish projects. They listen patiently to everyone's problems. They volunteer their time and energy again and again. On the surface, this seems noble, but internally something else may be happening. Each moment of forced agreement becomes a small emotional compromise. Each hidden frustration becomes another drop of pressure in the container. At first, it feels manageable, but over time the weight grows heavier. Eventually, the suppressed emotions begin to leak out in subtle, almost invisible ways. Not through open anger, but through passive aggression, through sarcastic comments that carry hidden resentment, through guilt-inducing statements like, "I guess I'm the only one who ever helps around here," or through silent judgment toward the very people they tried so hard to please. This is one of the great psychological paradoxes. The person who appears the nicest can sometimes be the most internally frustrated, because their kindness was never truly voluntary. It was protective. It was a strategy designed to avoid rejection rather than express genuine care. And when kindness is rooted in fear, it slowly transforms into something else: resentment. Consider how many relationships quietly suffer from this dynamic. A partner who constantly avoids conflict in order to appear supportive. A friend who always agrees with everyone but secretly feels unheard. A coworker who helps everyone yet feels deeply unappreciated. These individuals are not dishonest in a malicious way. They are simply afraid that if they reveal their real thoughts, their real frustrations, their real boundaries, they will lose the approval that has become so psychologically important. But the tragedy is this: when a person hides their authentic self long enough, they begin losing connection with it entirely. They become trapped inside the role of the nice person, a role that demands constant politeness, constant agreement, constant emotional suppression. And while others may admire them for it, internally they feel exhausted. Because maintaining a mask requires enormous psychological energy. Real emotional freedom only begins when a person realizes something profound. Approval is not the same as connection. Being liked is not the same as being understood. And true kindness cannot grow from fear. True kindness requires honesty. It requires the courage to express disagreement. It requires the strength to say no when something feels wrong. Because only when a person stops performing kindness and begins living authentically can their relationships become real rather than merely safe. There is a strange psychological tension that begins to grow inside a person who constantly sacrifices their true feelings in order to maintain the image of being nice. At first, the sacrifice feels small: a polite smile when something bothers you, a quiet "that's okay" when it actually isn't, a willingness to help even when your energy is already drained. These moments seem harmless. In fact, society often rewards them. People admire the person who never complains, the one who is always cooperative, the one who steps forward when others step back. But something subtle begins to happen beneath the surface. Every time a person ignores their own emotional truth to maintain politeness, a small psychological imbalance is created. It is almost invisible in the beginning, like a tiny crack forming beneath the foundation of a building, and slowly that crack begins to widen. Because human emotions do not disappear simply because we refuse to express them. They accumulate. They organize themselves quietly in the unconscious. And one of the most powerful emotions that grows in this hidden place is resentment. Resentment is not loud like anger. It does not explode immediately. Instead, it moves slowly, like a shadow stretching across the mind. Imagine a familiar situation: a coworker who always says yes. They help everyone finish their tasks. They volunteer for extra responsibilities. They stay late when others go home. They offer support, advice, and time without hesitation. On the surface, everyone sees generosity. They may even admire this person. But internally, the experience may be very different. Each favor they perform becomes a silent emotional record, a quiet entry written into the mind. I helped them. I sacrificed my time. I gave more than I received. At first, these thoughts feel harmless, but gradually they begin to transform into something more dangerous. A hidden sense of emotional debt. The person begins to believe, often unconsciously, that their kindness has created an obligation. After everything I do for people, they should appreciate me more. After everything I sacrifice, they should treat me better. But here lies the psychological trap. Because these expectations were never communicated, no one was told about the emotional cost. No one was informed that each act of kindness carried a silent condition. So the world continues moving normally, unaware of the invisible ledger forming inside this person's mind. And that is when the bitterness begins. It does not arrive dramatically. It arrives quietly. A small sarcastic comment here, a passive remark there, a subtle withdrawal of warmth. Instead of openly expressing frustration, the person begins communicating anger indirectly, maybe through humor that carries an edge, maybe through statements that seem casual but contain hidden accusations. I guess I'm the only one who cares around here. I'm used to doing everything myself anyway. These phrases may sound harmless to the listener, but psychologically they reveal something deeper. They reveal suppressed anger trying to escape without breaking the identity of being the nice person. Because the individual still wants to maintain that image. They still want to be seen as generous and agreeable. So the anger cannot come out directly. Instead, it finds another path. Psychologists call this passive aggression, the expression of hostility through indirect, subtle behaviors rather than open confrontation, and it is one of the most common outcomes of long-term emotional suppression. The person continues performing kindness on the outside, while resentment slowly expands on the inside. Over time, this creates a painful psychological contradiction. Externally, they appear helpful and cooperative. Internally, they feel unappreciated and misunderstood, and because they never allowed themselves to communicate honestly in the beginning, the resentment becomes increasingly difficult to release. Eventually, they may begin judging the very people they tried so hard to please, thinking things like, "People are selfish. No one values what I do. I give everything, and no one gives back." But the deeper truth is more complicated. The resentment did not come from kindness itself. It came from kindness that was disconnected from honesty. True generosity does not create hidden debts. It does not secretly expect repayment. But when kindness is used as a way to earn appreciation, approval, or validation, it slowly transforms into a transaction. And when the expected reward never arrives, the mind begins to feel cheated. This is why the person who appears nicest on the surface can sometimes carry the deepest frustration within, because their kindness was not simply an act of goodwill. It was an attempt to secure emotional value in a world where they feared being overlooked. And the longer this pattern continues, the heavier the emotional weight becomes, until eventually the polite smile begins to feel less like kindness and more like a mask hiding a storm beneath it. Not all forms of kindness emerge from innocence. Sometimes kindness is calculated not loudly, not obviously, but quietly, carefully, and with remarkable precision. Human beings have always understood, consciously or unconsciously, that perception is power. The way people see you determines the doors that open, the trust that forms, and the influence you are allowed to carry. This is why social psychologists speak about something called impression management, the subtle art of shaping how others perceive you. At its core, the principle is simple. If people believe you are kind, they trust you, and trust is one of the most powerful psychological currencies that exists in human relationships. Trust lowers defenses. Trust makes people vulnerable. Trust makes people open their doors, their time, and sometimes even their judgment. This is why kindness can sometimes become more than a personality trait. It can become a strategy. Think about a situation many people have experienced without fully recognizing it. You meet someone who seems incredibly supportive. They compliment your ideas. They encourage your decisions. They laugh at your jokes. They appear to understand you better than most people. Their presence feels comfortable, reassuring, and slowly, a quiet belief forms in your mind. This person is on my side. This belief is powerful because human beings are naturally drawn to those who validate them. When someone consistently reflects approval back at us, we begin to see them as allies. But sometimes that approval is not simply kindness. Sometimes it is positioning. Because after a period of building this image of loyalty and support, something subtle begins to change. Requests begin to appear. At first, they seem small. Could you help me with this one thing? Would you mind doing me a quick favor? And because the relationship already feels positive, because the person has been so supportive, saying no begins to feel uncomfortable. You feel a quiet sense of obligation. After all, they have always been there for you, haven't they? So you help, and nothing seems unusual. But over time, the requests slowly grow larger. More time, more effort, more emotional investment. And yet the same psychological force continues to operate. You feel reluctant to refuse, because refusing someone who has been consistently nice feels like a betrayal. This is the subtle power of emotional leverage. Kindness, when used strategically, can become a form of influence. not through intimidation, not through force, but through carefully cultivated obligation. The person has created a social image that makes resistance psychologically uncomfortable, and often, this pattern unfolds so quietly that the person on the receiving end does not even notice what is happening until much later. They simply feel increasingly responsible for meeting the expectations of someone who once appeared endlessly supportive. In extreme cases, psychologists connect this pattern with something known as covert narcissism. Unlike the loud, arrogant form of narcissism most people recognize, covert narcissism hides behind humility and politeness. The individual may appear soft-spoken, agreeable, even self-sacrificing, but beneath that surface exists a deep psychological need for influence, validation, and control. Instead of demanding attention openly, they secure it through emotional positioning. Instead of asserting power directly, they create situations where others feel compelled to serve their needs. Their politeness becomes camouflage. Their kindness becomes a pathway into people's trust. And once trust is secured, influence quietly follows. This does not mean every supportive person carries hidden motives. Genuine kindness certainly exists, but the psychological difference lies in one crucial detail. Authentic kindness does not demand silent repayment. It does not create invisible contracts. It does not slowly convert gratitude into obligation. Strategic niceness, however, often does. And the danger of this dynamic is not only the manipulation itself. It is how invisible it can be, because the human mind is naturally disarmed by kindness. When someone smiles, supports us, and validates our thoughts, we instinctively relax our skepticism. We lower our guard. We assume good intentions. This is why strategic kindness can be one of the most subtle forms of influence in human relationships. It does not feel like control. It feels like friendship, but the difference becomes visible over time. In genuine relationships, kindness flows freely in both directions. There is no pressure, no hidden ledger, no emotional debt quietly accumulating. But when kindness is used as leverage, the balance slowly shifts, and eventually, what once felt like support begins to feel like expectation. Not because kindness itself is dangerous, but because in the hands of someone seeking quiet power, even the gentlest smile can become a tool. There is a quiet psychological trap that many people fall into without ever realizing it. It begins with a beautiful intention, the desire to be a good person, to be kind, to be helpful, to be someone others can rely on. At first, this identity seems admirable. Society praises it, families encourage it. Communities reward those who appear generous and morally upright. But beneath this noble image lies a complex psychological dynamic that few people truly understand, because the moment a person becomes deeply attached to the identity of being a good person, something subtle begins to happen inside their mind. They start rejecting any part of themselves that does not fit that image. Anger becomes unacceptable. Selfishness becomes shameful. Frustration becomes something to hide, and slowly, the person begins to divide their own personality. On one side stands the identity they want to present to the world, the helpful one, the patient one, the morally superior one. On the other side stand the emotions they do not want to see: irritation, envy, resentment, and the natural human desire to sometimes put their own needs first. But the mind does not simply erase these unwanted emotions. It hides them. They sink into the deeper layers of the psyche, into the unconscious regions where rejected parts of the personality quietly wait. And once hidden, they begin influencing behavior in ways the person does not consciously recognize. This is where the real psychological tension begins, because when someone believes strongly that they are always kind, always generous, always morally right, they unconsciously begin comparing themselves to others. They start observing the world through a distorted lens. They notice when others fail to be as helpful as they believe themselves to be. They notice when someone prioritizes their own needs. They notice when someone refuses to sacrifice the way they do. And slowly, an internal narrative begins to form. I'm always helping people. Why are others so selfish? I give so much, Why does no one else care as much as I do? At first, these thoughts may appear harmless, but psychologically they reveal something deeper. They reveal a growing sense of moral superiority, because when a person defines themselves entirely by goodness, they unconsciously place themselves on a higher moral platform. They see themselves as the generous one, and they begin seeing others as the ungrateful ones. Over time, this creates a subtle psychological divide between the self and the world. The person starts feeling misunderstood, underappreciated, even victimized. They may believe they are surrounded by people who take advantage of their kindness, but what they often fail to see is the hidden dynamic within themselves. Their kindness is no longer simply an act of generosity. It has become part of their identity, and identities must constantly be protected. So whenever reality threatens that identity, the mind finds ways to defend it. Instead of questioning their own expectations, they blame others for not appreciating them enough. Instead of acknowledging their own hidden resentment, they convince themselves they are simply surrounded by selfish people. The irony is profound. The more someone insists they are always good, the less aware they become of the darker parts of their personality, because those parts have been pushed so deeply into the unconscious that they no longer feel like part of the self. Yet they continue to influence behavior in subtle ways. This hidden side of the personality often appears most clearly in relationships, not through open anger or direct hostility, but through quieter forms of emotional pressure, through guilt, through subtle manipulation, through statements that carry hidden expectations. I've done so much for you. I thought you cared about me. I guess I shouldn't expect anything in return. On the surface, these statements sound like expressions of hurt, but psychologically they often reveal something deeper. They reveal the shadow side of the good person identity trying to reclaim balance, because the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge never truly disappear. They simply wait for moments when they can express themselves indirectly, sometimes through judgment, sometimes through passive aggression, sometimes through emotional control. This is one of the great paradoxes of human psychology. The people who most strongly believe they are always kind are often the least aware of the subtle ways they pressure others. Not because they are malicious, but because their self-image prevents them from seeing their own complexity. The truth is that every human being carries both light and shadow, both generosity and selfishness, both patience and anger. Real psychological maturity does not come from pretending the darker parts of the personality do not exist. It comes from recognizing them, understanding them, and integrating them into a more honest, balanced self. Because only when a person stops trying to be perfectly good can they finally become genuinely human. There is a quiet misunderstanding that many people carry about kindness. They believe kindness means always being agreeable, always being polite, always avoiding conflict. They believe kindness means saying yes, even when something inside them is screaming no. But real kindness is something far deeper than politeness. Real kindness is honesty, and honesty is not always comfortable. Think about the people you trust the most in your life, the ones whose presence feels safe, the ones whose words feel genuine, the ones you instinctively rely on when life becomes confusing. If you look closely, you will notice something interesting about them. They are not the people who always agree with you. They are not the people who constantly tell you what you want to hear. In fact, sometimes they are the ones who challenge you. Sometimes they are the ones who tell you the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. And strangely, this honesty does not damage your trust in them. It strengthens it, because deep inside, human beings recognize authenticity. We can feel when someone is being real. We can sense when their words come from sincerity rather than performance. This is the foundation of genuine kindness. It is not built on approval. It is built on authenticity. A psychologically healthy person understands something very important about relationships. Kindness without boundaries eventually becomes resentment. Because when someone constantly sacrifices their own needs in order to maintain harmony, they are slowly abandoning themselves. And when a person abandons themselves long enough, the cost eventually appears in the form of emotional exhaustion. The smile becomes heavier, the patience becomes thinner, the generosity begins to feel like a burden rather than a choice. This is why true kindness requires something that many people find difficult: the courage to say no, not aggressively, not cruelly, but honestly. A mature individual can look someone in the eyes and say something simple yet powerful. "I care about you, but I cannot do this." That sentence carries both compassion and self-respect. It acknowledges the relationship while still protecting personal boundaries. And this is where real emotional integrity begins. Because a person who respects their own limits can offer kindness freely. Their generosity is not forced. Their help is not given out of fear. Their presence is not driven by the need to be liked. Instead, their kindness becomes something natural, something authentic. When they offer support, it comes from genuine willingness. When they give their time, it comes from real care. And because of this, their kindness carries no hidden conditions. There is no silent expectation of repayment, no invisible emotional ledger tracking who owes what. They do not secretly keep score. They do not quietly wait for recognition. They simply act according to what feels right. This kind of kindness is powerful because it is clean. There is no resentment hiding beneath it, no manipulation behind the smile, no emotional pressure disguised as generosity. It simply exists. You can see this clearly in people who have developed strong inner awareness. They are capable of saying no without guilt. They are capable of disagreeing without hostility. They are capable of expressing frustration without turning it into cruelty. Because they understand that honesty is not the enemy of kindness. Dishonesty is. Pretending to agree when you do not agree eventually destroys trust. Pretending to be fine when you are not eventually creates emotional distance. Pretending to be endlessly available eventually leads to burnout. Authenticity, however, creates something much stronger. It creates clarity. When people know where you stand, they know how to relate to you. They know your limits. They know your values. And this clarity actually strengthens relationships rather than weakening them. Because trust grows when people feel they are interacting with the real version of you, not a carefully constructed performance. The paradox is that many people believe honesty will make them less likable. But the opposite is often true. People may not always agree with honest individuals, but they respect them. And respect creates deeper, more stable connections than approval ever could. True kindness is not about maintaining a flawless image. It is about living in alignment with what is real. It is about treating others with compassion while also honoring your own humanity. And when a person learns this balance, when they stop performing kindness and start living it, something remarkable begins to happen. Their relationships become lighter, their interactions become clearer, and their kindness finally becomes what it was always meant to be. Not a mask to earn approval, but a natural expression of a person who is no longer afraid to be genuine. Once you begin to understand this hidden psychology, something powerful happens. You stop being hypnotized by surface-level politeness. You start paying attention to deeper signals. Do this person's actions match their words? Do they respect boundaries? Do they express disagreement honestly? Because real character reveals itself not in constant niceness, but in consistent authenticity. The truth is, healthy relationships are not built on pretending to be perfect. They are built on emotional honesty, on the courage to express what is real. And perhaps the most important lesson is this: you must also be careful not to become trapped in the same illusion yourself. You do not need to perform kindness to be worthy. You do not need to hide your truth to be accepted. Because the strongest, most trustworthy people in the world are not those who appear nice all the time. They are the ones who are brave enough to be genuinely human.